I'm gonna call that a win, okay? But just know that when you actually start doing this process, no one's good at this. No one walks in and they're like, oh yeah, super simple. I can just like do this in my sleep. No. It's confusing for everyone, and it's complicated for everyone, and every time you do it, it's gonna be confusing and complicated for you too. And that is the beginning of my uplifting speech about financial aid. Okay. My plan was to talk about the three main kinds of financial aid, what you're gonna be seeing, and then the main way that you're gonna be getting them, which is the FAFSA, okay? For most of you, you're gonna see kind of like a mix of different kinds of financial aid, and it's gonna come to you from different sources, and so it kind of depends on a lot of things. One of the biggest things that financial aid is going to depend on is your socioeconomic status. And under no circumstances, before you completely panic, would I ever like just ask you outright, hey, where do you stand on the socioeconomic scale? Like, no, that is like a not okay thing to ask. If you have specific questions about your situation that you want to come and ask me, like aside, personally, I'm always here and I'm happy to help with that. But I'm never gonna like announce things to the middle of the class and ask everyone like, say where you are. Are you wealthy, middle class, or poor? Anyone? Anyone? Like, my God. So that's not even a thing we're talking about. But as I talk in your brain, maybe try and figure out where you stand in your own mind so that you can have an idea of where you fit in this process and what that's most likely gonna look like for you, okay? The gist here is if we're talking about financial aid that is given to you that you don't go seek out, okay, let's just start right there. This is almost always going to be what we call needs-based. Have we talked about that phrasing here before? Need means how much you need help paying for college. And your college is going to be looking at your need, your level of need, and also the federal government is going to be looking at your level of need to determine how much help they might give you. Does that make sense? Generally speaking, most students fall into one of three categories. Category one is wealthy. If your family is well off, and you know they are, and you have like a decent idea of what that looks like in your brain, what wealthy, middle class, and poor means as big general phrases, okay? If you know your family is wealthy, almost always either your college or the government is going to assess you as low need. You don't need help. Your parents could pay for it out of pocket. Will they is a whole different story, but they don't care about will, they care about could. Can they pay for it? If the answer is yes, you're probably going to get very little in the form of financial aid. Does that make sense? They're not gonna assume that you need help, so they're not gonna give it to you. If you fall on the opposite side of the spectrum, where the government sees that you have high need, your family's finances are not so hot, and they can't pay for it out of pocket, you need a lot of help paying for college. Now we're talking you're gonna have cash thrown at you from a variety of sources. This is one of the only times in your life when it will pay to not be super well off, or if you're like a child of a broken home, like I was. This is like the only time in your life where a divorce will actually work in your favor, because like you'll get lots of money. If you fall in that middle category with the middle class, where like your family's okay, they're comfy, they can pay for basic needs, maybe a little bit more, but not a ton more. This is kind of the worst place to be for financial aid. It's also where most students fall, is that middle class category where the government's going to say, well, you don't need help because your parents are fine, but technically your parents can't pay for it out of pocket, so you're gonna get no assistance, but you kind of need it. Well, that's the place that sucks, okay? The wealthy place, I mean, the government's not really worried about you, and neither are your colleges, and honestly, kind of, neither am I to some extent, you know what I mean? I gear everything towards the middle to lower end of the spectrum, because that's where you need to know where to find the most assistance, okay? If you, well, here, let's back it up. Let me get to that, I'll get to that with the FAFSA. Actually, you know what, I'm gonna start with the FAFSA. That's what I'm gonna do here. How many of you have heard of FAFSA? How many of you get the idea that it's fairly important? Yeah, yes, it is. And we kind of like hammer the FAFSA into your head, and I'm going to too, because it is super important. The FAFSA stands for Free Application for Federal Student Aid. Yes? The free part's nice, right off the bat. I have some kids, they're like, yeah, I went to go fill out my FAFSA and they tried to charge me money. Then that was not the FAFSA. The FAFSA is free, always, always, always. What this is this is based on your parents' income, okay? And this is how the government, the American government, okay, because you're saying federal student aid, so this is the American government, this is how they decide how much need you have, how much help you need to pay for college. Does that make sense? And they do that based entirely on your parents' income. If you live in a nuclear family with both parents in the same household and they both make an income, this is the FAFSA. You have to enter in both of those in the FAFSA. If you have a different situation, okay, if you have divorced parents and you live with one, or you have a joint custody situation kind of thing, or you have divorced parents and they have remarried, do you kind of see what I'm saying? Now this gets a little bit more complicated, and it kind of depends on your individual situation. But what I usually tell my kids is, first of all, if you live in a single parent household, welcome to the party, because you're going to get boatloads of cash from the FAFSA. Okay? Hi. My parents split when I was in high school, and I lived with my mom. And my dad lived in Palm Springs, so I didn't even have joint custody with him, if that makes sense, because he was in a different state. So I just lived with my mom. I had visitation with him, but there was no joint custody. I didn't live with him, and that was like in the legal documents. He paid child support, which you do not factor into the FAFSA. Yay! See what I'm saying? So all that the FAFSA was based on was my mom's paycheck, which was meh at the time. Not terrible, but not awesome at all. And I got my first 2 years of college paid for, simply because she was low income and it was one income in our household. Does that make sense? If you have joint custody and you bounce back and forth between parents, between households, what I always tell my kids is you file for the household that you spend the most time in, and what I would recommend is that household is the one that makes less money. Okay? Work it. Yes. If there's no legal way to tell which parent you spend more time with, then they're going to ask you to file based on the parent that you spend 51% of your time with, or whatever it happens to be, and you decide what that looks like. You pick the household that makes less money. Please, Lord, pick the one that makes less money. And you fill in their information. If you are in a divorced household and you're picking the household on just one of the two households, and they have remarried, yes, you have to enter in both of those sets of income. Does that make sense? Even if it's a step parent, doesn't matter. It's about the household that you live in. So yes, you have to enter both. I had a student ask me this morning if I have joint custody between my parents and I'm picking this household, or one of the households, my step parent is on disability and they don't work, would that be the better one to choose? And I said, oh hell yes. Because that's a single income household, is what that is. Does that make sense? Don't lie. I'm not yours anymore. But I am going to tell you to pick the situation that is most advantageous to you, okay? And again, this is probably the only time in your life when coming from a crappy home life will work in your favor. So you use the ever-living out of that when you go to college for as free as you can get it, okay? Okay, yes. The way the FAFSA works is, on October 1st, this is like a super important neon flashing sign, important date, October 1st of every year is when the FAFSA opens up for seniors. So next fall, on October 1st, your senior year, that is when the FAFSA is open to you for getting ready for college for the following year. Does that make sense? We're going to plaster it everywhere, don't even worry. I'm going to be screaming it from the hilltops. The FAFSA's open on October 1st, and I highly recommend you do the FAFSA that day. Or real close to it, you know what I mean? You can literally do it that day and just bang it out and get it done and then you're finished. But the FAFSA it's a pain in the butt, I'm going to tell you in advance. But I'm also going to tell you this is darn near required. There is not an option here for not doing the FAFSA. Unless you have a 100% guaranteed plan for how you're going to pay for college, like your parents have already told you they're funding the entire thing out of their pocket, you have a full ride scholarship somewhere that is guaranteed and it's not going to fall through. Unless you have an airtight plan, you are doing the FAFSA because this is how you get money for college. And I have kids who don't even know what they qualify for until they get the letter back, and some of them are like really surprised by how much money they get. Because I had a kid that was kind of like, it's kind of sad, but he's like, I didn't realize like how poor I was, because like he thought he was fine, like his parents were fine, but according to the government, he fell below a certain point that he got like boatloads of cash, and he was like, oh heck yeah, because he thought like he was good, but according to their stature, like he's technically under the poverty line. So, because you don't know where the poverty line is for the government, you know what I mean? You could get more than you think. So, just be ready for that, okay? That what they think is need may or may not be what you think is need, and you might get way more than you're expecting, which is always nice. It is a process, it's all online, and how you do the FAFSA is with your parents' tax records. Whichever parent you're using as your household that you live with, okay? Do you know what taxes are? We're gonna talk about this later, like after the SAT, we're gonna have a big, scary, like icky grown-up day where we talk about things like taxes and voting and credit and a bunch of other like disgusting, depressing things. We're gonna talk about that now. I bring cookies that day, so you'll be fine. But the basic gist of taxes is this. Have you heard your parents talk? Are they talking about this right now? Probably. Taxes are due by April 15th. Every year, anybody that works at a job that actually makes decent money, therefore not you, no offense. We're not talking about like teenager part-time jobs. You probably don't make enough to even have to pay taxes. So that's not even a thing. Grown-ups have to pay taxes every single year, and what that is we submit our records on how much money we made in that year and how much in taxes we paid. You know, you get taxes taken out of your paycheck, right? We report all of that every year to an institution called the IRS, which is the Internal Revenue Service, which is a branch of the federal government. We report it to them, and they check it to see if we paid enough in taxes every year. If the amount we've already paid, it's already done, if that was enough based on our income. Does that make sense? They check it, and they send us back a report. That's called a tax return. Have you heard your parents say that phrase? Waiting for a tax returns. Yes, every adult ever says things like this. I just got mine back. That tax return looks like, it almost looks like a little, like a chart, almost like an Excel chart, with a bunch of little boxes with a bunch of numbers in it. And I've paid taxes for like 19 years now, and I have no idea most of those boxes. And I feel like I should to be a functioning adult, don't. So I just file it, and I'm like, yep, there's my tax return, but I don't ask too many questions. The way you do the FAFSA is, whichever adult you're using to be your head of household for FAFSA purposes, you sit down at a computer with them, with their tax return, or if you have a really nice mommy, like mine was, she did it for me. Mom, can you do the FAFSA? For sure. Like, great, thanks. Never did it. I never even saw it. You have to sit down with that tax return. They ask you to fill in all your information, click to the next screen kind of thing, basically like a college application, and then they're going to start saying things like, from box 2 of your tax return, enter that amount here. And you look at the tax return through box 2, and you enter that amount. From box 11 of your tax return, enter that amount here. Are you seeing what I'm saying? And it's just like pages of that. That's just, all it's checking is your parents' income. That's it. Submit, and that's all. Okay, so if you have the tax return right in front of you, it's super easy. It's not hard, it's just time consuming. You know what I mean? You do it with the rigmarole, you fill it all in, you click submit, and bang, your FAFSA's done. The other thing you have to put on there is which colleges you're even thinking about attending. So you have to have at least a decent idea of that. I would have it narrowed down to your short list before you submit the FAFSA, which is October your senior year. You should be there anyway. You should have your short list. You're doing your applications, you do your FAFSA, send that baby in. What they're going to send back to you is, based on your parents' income and your home life situation, we've decided that you qualify for the following forms of financial aid. And they're probably going to be a blend of those three things. You don't have to accept any of those things. It's just saying what you qualify for. And if you decide you want any of that, now is when you respond to them and say, yes, please. I'll take this, and this, and I will say no to that. And that's how they determine your financial aid, okay? And they'll do it based on institution. So for example, when I went to NIC for my first 2 years as my backup plan, based on my mom's income, I got something called a Pell Grant. A Pell Grant is what you're probably going to get if you are even slightly low income, okay? We were fairly low income, I got a Pell Grant that paid for my entire first 2 years of NIC, including books. I went to college for free for 2 years, simply because I had a single income household